The 1990 United States of America half-dollar coin, widely recognized as part of the Kennedy half-dollar series, holds a significant place in American numismatic history due to its enduring connection with President John F. Kennedy, its role in circulation, and its relevance to collectors in the late 20th century. This coin, minted 27 years after the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, continues the series that was first issued in 1964 as a tribute to the 35th President of the United States. The 1990 issue is composed primarily of a copper-nickel clad composition for circulating strikes, with a core of pure copper bonded to outer layers of copper-nickel alloy, 75% copper, 25% nickel, resulting in an overall metallic composition of 91.67% copper and 8.33% nickel. The coin has a standard diameter of 30.61 mm, 1.205 inches, a thickness of 2.15 mm, and a weight of 11.34 grams, making it larger than a quarter and heavier, which has historically contributed to its limited use in everyday commerce by the late 20th century, as vending machines and daily transactions increasingly favored smaller denominations. The obverse of the coin prominently features the left-facing portrait of President John F. Kennedy, designed by Chief Engraver Gilroy Roberts in 1964 and retained through subsequent issues with minor modifications over the decades. Above the portrait is the inscription, Liberty, with Kennedy's hair slightly overlapping the letters, and the national motto, In God We Trust, divided on either side of the truncation of the neck, with the date, 1990, positioned below. The mint mark, when present for coins struck at Denver or San Francisco, appears just below Kennedy's neck truncation and above the date, while Philadelphia minted coins from this era typically lacked a mint mark. The reverse design, created by Frank Gasparo, showcases the presidential seal, a heraldic eagle with outstretched wings clutching an olive branch in its right talon and a bundle of arrows in its left, symbolizing the nation's desire for peace yet readiness for defense. Above the eagle's head is a ring of 50 stars representing the states, and in its beak flows a scroll bearing the national motto, E Pluribus Unum. Surrounding the central design are the inscriptions, United States of America, and the denomination, half-dollar. The edge of the coin is reeded with 150 reeds, adding both a tactile and security feature to deter clipping. In 1990, the Kennedy half-dollar was struck at 3 facilities, Philadelphia, no mint mark, Denver, D, and San Francisco, S, for both proof and special collector versions. The Philadelphia and Denver issues were intended for circulation, but by this period, half-dollars were largely removed from active commerce and were often released only in mint sets or through banks upon request, as the public had shifted away from their daily use since the mid-1970s. The San Francisco Mint produced 2 distinct proof types, the standard proof coin with a mirror-like finish and frosted devices, and the silver proof in some sets with a 90% silver, 10% copper composition, although standard 1990 proof sets typically featured the copper-nickel clad composition. The mintage for the 1990 half-dollar reflects this decline in circulation demand. Approximately 20,734,123 coins were struck at Philadelphia, 13,042,738 at Denver, and 3,299,559 proofs at San Francisco, making the total production relatively modest compared to earlier decades. Collectors often assess these coins based on condition, with circulated examples holding primarily face value, while uncirculated and proof strikes, especially those with high grades assigned by professional grading services, Mississippi 65 and above for business strikes, PR 69 or PR 74. Proofs carry premiums in the numismatic market. Key factors influencing value include strike quality, luster, contact marks, and any toning that may have developed over 3 decades of storage. The coin does not contain silver in its regular circulation strikes, a change that occurred after 1970 when the 40% silver content was discontinued. Therefore, its intrinsic metal value is tied to its copper and nickel content, which is typically below its face value in terms of melt worth. Historically, The 1990 Kennedy half-dollar reflects a transitional period in U.S. coinage when half-dollars became more of a collector's denomination than a circulating necessity, paralleling shifts in public transaction habits and the rise of electronic payment methods. This coin also carries historical resonance for its enduring memorial to President Kennedy, whose legacy continued to be honored by this series for decades. Collectors seeking a complete date and mintmark set of Kennedy half-dollars include the 1990 issues as standard entries, and while they are not considered rare, high-quality specimens, especially deep cameo proofs or coins struck with full details, remain desirable for registry sets and advanced numismatic collections. Additionally, the 1990 Kennedy half-dollar marks a period of consistent design before the U.S. Mint introduced major changes in finishes and commemorative issues in the following decades. Its continued production despite low public demand also illustrates the U.S. Mint's policy of maintaining the denomination largely for collectors and ceremonial purposes, as half-dollars were still used in some casino and vending operations, though increasingly rare in ordinary change. Over time, the 1990 issue has become a representative piece for late 20th century clad coinage, durable, practical, yet underutilized in the evolving monetary landscape of the United States. The 1956 2 shilling coin from the United Kingdom is a fascinating and historically rich piece of mid-20th century British numismatics, bridging the period between the early reign of Queen Elizabeth II and the last years of pre-decimal currency. Minted during the post-war era, this coin represents not only a denomination of monetary value but also a symbol of continuity, transition, and the evolving design language of British coinage. The 2 shilling coin, commonly known as the florin, was introduced in 1849 under Queen Victoria as part of an experiment toward decimalization since its value equaled 1/10 of a pound, 20 shillings equaled 1 pound, so 2 shillings were equivalent to 24 old pence, and 10 such coins made a full pound. By 1956, the florin was a well-established denomination, widely used in commerce, and familiar to the British public as a convenient coin for medium-sized transactions, such as bus fares, groceries, or cinema tickets in the mid-20th century. The 1956 issue belongs to the early years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, as she ascended the throne in 1952 following the death of her father, King George VI, and her first coinage began appearing in 1953. Thus, the 1956 2 shilling coin carries the youthful portrait of the young queen and reflects the optimism, reconstruction, and gradual modernization of Britain during the 1950s. The obverse of the 1956 2 shilling coin features the first definitive portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Mary Gillick. This portrait is particularly admired for its youthful and naturalistic representation of the Queen, without a crown, but wearing a laurel wreath or olive branch crown, a classical symbol of peace and victory, tying her image to a long tradition of ancient and British rulers portrayed in similar fashion. The legend surrounding the portrait reads, Elizabeth II Dei Gratia Regina, or in full Latin, Elizabeth II Dei Gratia Regina, meaning, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. This inscription reflects the formal titles of the monarch while maintaining the elegance of Latin tradition. Notably, the 1956 issue is part of the period before the phrase, FID DEF, Fide Defensor, or Defender of the Faith, was fully standardized in all issues, so variations existed depending on the specific denomination and minting year. The portrait by Gillick was used from 1953 until 1970 and is considered one of the most iconic royal effigies because it represents Elizabeth II at the start of her reign, embodying youth, modernity, and hope for a recovering nation. On the reverse of the 1956 florin, the design is a continuation of the pre-decimal 2 shilling motif introduced under King George VI in 1947, when silver was removed from the coinage and replaced with cupro-nickel alloy, 75% copper and 25% nickel. The design shows a Tudor rose in the center, surrounded by a thistle, shamrock, and leek, representing England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales respectively, symbols of the 4 constituent nations of the United Kingdom. Around the edge, the inscription reads, FID DEF 2 shillings 1956. FID DEF, stands for Fide Defensor, Defender of the Faith, a title originally granted to Henry VIII by the Pope and retained by successive British monarchs even after the break with the Roman Church. The reverse was designed by Edgar Fuller and modeled by Cecil Thomas, representing a straightforward, heraldic, and patriotic style that was typical of the late 1940s and 1950s British coinage. The overall aesthetic was meant to be practical yet dignified, easy to recognize, and reflective of national unity. The composition of the 1956 2-shilling coin is cupro-nickel, which was introduced in 1947 to replace the 50% silver standard that had been used previously. This change was due to post-war economic constraints and the need to preserve precious metal reserves. The coin has a diameter of 28.5 millimeters, a weight of 11.3 grams, and a milled reeded edge, making it durable and suitable for circulation over many years. The switch to cupro-nickel also made the coins harder wearing, resistant to tarnish, and cheaper to produce, though it removed the intrinsic bullion value that silver coins once had. By 1956, the public had become accustomed to the new composition, and the florin continued to circulate heavily, often showing signs of wear in higher grades. From a historical perspective, the 1956 2-shilling coin represents a Britain that was gradually emerging from the austerity of the post-war years. Rationing had ended by the mid-1950s, the economy was beginning to stabilize, and there was a sense of cautious optimism. Queen Elizabeth II had been on the throne for 4 years, her coronation in 1953 marking a new Elizabethan era. The florin, being a relatively high-value coin for everyday people, equivalent to about 1/10 of a pound, which in modern terms might approximate £2 to £3 in purchasing power, was widely used in everyday commerce, particularly for entertainment, local travel, and moderate household expenses. Its survival rate today is relatively good because these coins were minted in large quantities and were often saved in drawers, jars, or coin collections when decimalization occurred in 1971, at which point 2 shillings became directly equivalent to 10 new pence in the decimal system. Thus, the 1956 florin remained legal tender well into the 1990s as a 10-pence coin, though by then it was being gradually withdrawn in favor of the smaller 10p pieces introduced in 1992. In terms of mintage, the 1956 2-shilling had a relatively standard production for the period, with millions struck for circulation at the Royal Mint. Exact mintage figures are recorded as around 44,876,000 coins, making it not particularly rare in circulated condition, but higher-grade examples, extremely fine or uncirculated, are more sought after by collectors due to the coin's tendency to wear down in everyday use. Uncirculated or proof-like specimens may carry a premium, especially those with sharp detail on the Tudor Rose and surrounding emblems. Collectors often seek well-struck examples with minimal bag marks, and because cupro-nickel tends to tone attractively over time, some coins display appealing light gray or golden hues. From a numismatic standpoint, the 1956 florin is significant for several reasons. It belongs to the first series of Queen Elizabeth II coins, which are historically important as the beginning of her long reign. It also represents the last phase of a long-running denomination that began as an experiment in decimalization more than a century earlier. Furthermore, the design is considered one of the last traditional, heraldic, and conservative coin motifs before the more modern and artistic coinage reforms of the late 1960s and early 1970s. The florin would eventually disappear entirely after decimalization, making this coin a relic of a bygone era of British currency. For collectors, the value of a 1956 2-shilling coin depends on condition, rarity, and historical appeal. Circulated coins often have only a modest collector value, typically ranging from £1 to £3 in average grades. Fine to very fine examples may fetch slightly more, while uncirculated or brilliant uncirculated pieces, particularly those from mint sets or preserved rolls, can be worth £10, £20 or more depending on the market. Proof examples exist but are very limited to special issues and can command a premium well above that. The coin is not generally considered scarce, but it remains a highly collectible item for those interested in mid-20th century British coinage, pre-decimal series, or the early reign of Elizabeth II. The cultural symbolism of the 1956 florin is equally interesting. Its reverse design, featuring the rose, thistle, shamrock, and leek, is a clear representation of unity among the nations of the United Kingdom during a time when the Commonwealth was shifting, and many former colonies were moving toward independence. Domestically, it was a coin familiar to all classes of society, often passed from hand to hand in working-class markets, railway stations, public houses, and emerging supermarkets of the era. The obverse portrait of a young queen, without a crown but with a laurel wreath, projected an image of continuity from the wartime generation to a new modern Britain. It was a time when the country was gradually rebuilding its infrastructure, creating the welfare state, and expanding its cultural influence through music, film, and international diplomacy. As part of the broader 2 shilling series, the 1956 coin does not have major varieties or mint errors that are widely documented, though occasional die cracks, off-center strikes, or planchette flaws are known among general minting errors and can attract the attention of specialist collectors. Some collectors also study the coin for die rotations or variations in strike quality due to the high volume of mintage. Cupro-nickel coins of this era often exhibit bag marks from the minting and distribution process, and finding examples free of such marks is considered a challenge in higher grades. The legacy of the 2 shilling coin is particularly notable because it served as the direct precursor to the decimal 10-pence coin. In fact, during decimalization in 1971, the florin was retained as an exact 10-pence piece because its value aligned perfectly: 2 shillings equals 24 old pence equals 10 new pence. This allowed the coin to remain in use for over 2 decades after decimalization, bridging 2 systems of currency and giving it a remarkably long lifespan in circulation. Many people in the 1980s and even early 1990s would still encounter 1950s florins in their change, though by then they were heavily worn and much less aesthetically sharp than their original form. The 1956 2 shilling coin therefore stands as both a monetary artifact and a cultural witness to the changing Britain of the 1950s and 1960s. It embodies the first portrait of the Queen, the post-war economic recovery, the lingering tradition of heraldic coin design, and the practical considerations of a nation transitioning toward modern currency systems. For numismatists, it offers a blend of affordability, availability, and historical richness, making it an ideal starting point for those exploring the Elizabeth II pre-decimal coinage series.